Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about real estate prices in the Western world. Now, are any real estate prices related to market forces anymore? Or are they related to, effectively oligopolies, groups of buyers that effectively have cornered the market now? And even the word market's the wrong. Cornered all the buying and the selling, and really now the transactions are just these buying oligopolies buying and selling to each other, particularly so in Australia. Now I'll give a sort of illustrate a couple of things here. Just a couple of days ago, there was an auction in Australia in quite a working class suburb that's traditionally been the cheapest real estate in Sydney, sort of in that general region, and quite an ordinary 1960s house that hasn't had a lot of work put into it, auctioned off for about $1 million. Now the people who turned up were nearly all sort of illiterate peasants talking in their third world language, and yet somehow there was no white people there. They had no second thoughts about money. They were more than casual about it, and would just keep on bidding as if money was no object, and it probably isn't. What a lot of there's numerous Chinese and Indian and even some Russian buying groups that are in buying agents that work for very, very well-heeled, corrupt warlords and goons and monopolists and so on in these places. And they've got a lot of money to burn. Their money has probably been made illegally, and so they want to launder it and burn it around the West, and they use real estate as the primary money laundering vehicle. Canada's a place where it happens, the US and so on. So these people are probably penniless peasants. They're just the buying agents for these well-to-do people, and they're just told, buy it, go and buy that, and they just keep on going. And so a place that in reality, would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars less than it is, they're going out, as I say, for just shy of $1 million, in again one of the poorest working class areas of Sydney. So this sort of thing is happening, everywhere all the time around Australia now. The idea of the couple, a younger couple wanting to get into the real estate game onto the ladder, and they're working sort of real jobs, and they've got to save, and they've got to, can we pay the mortgage, and that sort of thing. They're the ones that have to sweat every bid on an auction. These other people, they don't. There's not even a bead of perspiration. They're as casual, as laid back as can be, and their job is to simply buy a property for someone who's got a shitload of money, and again, who's probably made it illegally, or at the very least made it under monopoly conditions and government protection and so on. So, and you get crazy things like an illiterate part-time cleaner who's got a real estate portfolio of multi-millions, and they've got they've got barely enough to put food on the table each week, and yet there they are swanning around with an extensive real estate portfolio. But it's not their money; they're just again acting as a buying agent. Some friends of ours were auctioning their house. They were expecting around $2.5 million, and we were over we were there on the day that the first real estate inspection took place, and I was stunned that they weren't all. I mean, there was just a couple of white people, but really there was, the place was swamped with Chinese and Indian buying agents, people from rich Communist Party goons, Brahmin masters of the universe from India and that sort of thing. People in their 20s with a couple of children in tow who've got $2.5 million to throw around, but where does this money come from? They don't appear to do any work or anything, and also buying agents. There was a lady who was buying agent operating, she said, exclusively representing rich Chinese clients. And she was driving a top of the range Porsche and had, the diamond on her finger was bigger than the Arizona meteor crater, for goodness sake. So there's a lot of money around in this, but I was surprised at how many people came along as buying agents for the overseas well-heeled. And now what this means is that the real estate game here is not for the locals. It's only for the rich, wherever they come from in the world. It doesn't matter, but it's for them. It's exclusively for them. And so, there was a time when houses used to be for people to live in and to get a stake in society and to have, a stable situation for bringing up children and so on. That's how it used to be. But now it's not. Every bit of dirt and every bit of real estate in the West now is a plaything for international moneyed corrupt investors, and that's kind of how it is now. That our Western governments have allowed that to happen instead of saying, well, this housing is for the local people here. Instead of that, it's just been given as a gift to corrupt international financiers and various monopoly goons and so on. And just to illustrate, this means, of course, that market forces don't exist. These people don't have to make their money normally. They're not paying tax normally. They're just out laundering and spending whatever they have to, and so they're not operating under the same constraints as local people are. And so it's a complete mismatch. It's the deck is stacked incredibly to the advantage of these people, and you get crazy stuff like there's one Chinese investor that in one suburb owns more than 250 houses. Now, why this is allowed is quite beyond me, but why the government doesn't stop this sort of thing is quite beyond me. But to illustrate it some more, there's a small city in Australia, and they were really hit hard by deindustrialisation. They had a heavy industrial base, and so they really hit hard by deindustrialisation. And there was only 4% of workers were making more than $100,000 a year. That's how hard hit this economy was. Its average wage was $10,000 less than sort of anywhere else in Australia or any other large town city in Australia. So there was simply nobody there with money. Now, nonetheless, over a 4-year period, housing prices increased by 400%, or nearly 500%, while wages were declining, and while there were fewer and fewer people with jobs and fewer people out there looking. Now, to illustrate the craziness of it, the average time that a house was up for sale before it was sold was 21 weeks. That time frame close on doubled to 38 weeks. So it's taking longer to sell, and there are fewer people running around with money to buy it. Yet within 4 years, the price increased by, as I say, close to 500%, and without any demand. So it wasn't demand driven. There wasn't a shortage of stock. There's more stuff on the market than was before, more stuff for sale than it was before. So with bigger supply, longer lead time to sell, fewer people to buy, fewer people applying for loans, more unemployed people, all that sort of, in spite of that. Now under those circumstances, real estate prices fall. If they're market driven, they fall. People sort of, are they going to wait 38 weeks to sell a place? And no, they wouldn't. They'd lower the price, or they to do something to try and offload it. But and there's more and more people wanting to sell. People had lost their jobs; they needed to turn their house into cash, that sort of stuff. So in spite of that, as I say, the prices went up astronomically. This wasn't just 5% a year or 2% a year or 10% a year. It was like 100% per annum, prices increasing at a time when there was less demand and, as I say, longer lead time. So clearly real estate prices are not being driven by markets or demand or value or quality or anything like that. They're being driven by other factors coming largely from outside the country. Now you look at, say, cities like Vancouver and so on. They've also had a lot of overseas buyers. Now, if you want to go to these countries where these people come, you want to go and buy real estate there, you can't, or you've got to have a local partner. There are a lot of restrictions and difficulties in buying real estate. A lot of these places, China, for example, and or you just wouldn't want to buy it. The place is a shithole. Why would you bother? So in the reverse, Western money can't go moving over there to buy real estate. But other money, offshore money, Russian, Chinese, Chinese and Indian in particular, Russian coming third, is coming into Australia and elsewhere in the West to buy up real estate. And again, it's obvious they don't have to earn their money because they simply don't care what they pay. And again, almost $1 million for some shithole in a working class area. They're paying, and the bidders just didn't even blink. So this is a real problem, and it's one that attacks Western standards of living. Now, the big end of town, the banks and the big finance companies, they're sort of in the middle of all this rort, and they themselves sort of act as buying agents for corrupt offshore buyers and so on. But what it means is they're selling out their own citizens. House prices or mortgage payments and rent are increasing at 2 to 2.5 times, or more than 2.5 times, the rate of wage increases. And as people move into higher tax brackets on their wages, the relative cost in terms of net income, that's after tax and after superannuation or retirement payments, and that's after that, the net amount of cash you get in your hand after all deductions. It's even worse. It's like 3 times. The cost of just putting a roof over your head is 3 times more expensive than it was 30, 40 years ago. And that's one of the big things impacting cost of living, standard of living in the West. And yet Western governments have got showing not the slightest intention of doing anything about it. Now, on top of that, a lot of the money coming in from offshore is brought in, untaxed, and yet they're still taking advantage of various tax write-off schemes that are in the Western countries. But if the Western governments all did an audit of who owns what property and what their income is, they would find tens of thousands. Multiple tens of thousands of properties are owned by illiterate peasants who do nothing but push a broom for a living and couldn't possibly afford or have the sophistication to engage in putting together property portfolios like that. So this is something that really needs to be addressed in the West. If standard of living and giving people an opportunity to have a stake in society, buy property, have children, because fewer and fewer people can afford property, and fewer people see there's any value in having children, or because they won't be able to care for them properly. The future is too uncertain, the gig economy and so on. So they don't. The solution then is to bring in black and brown peasants from the third world where there are surplus populations to make up for it. But if the policies that are being pursued at the beginning, which are causing white people to back away from having children, why not address them as Viktor Orban is doing, and try and do something from the other side rather than just bring in all these peasants that will never integrate in Western society and are just part of the destruction of Western society. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.